Excellent. Welcome, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us on this Thursday evening. We are very pleased to be launching this session on the very important question of artificial intelligence and its place in the European Union and the European Union's place in the battle for artificial intelligence. Francesco, Grillo, thanks so much for inviting all of us to come and talk here. Just from a format perspective, as I understand it, we will start with Francesco Grillo will explain a little bit about the broader terms of the conference, following which Daniel, I think, if we're able to, we'll share slides. Otherwise, we'll walk through some of the kind of starting questions and findings related to this topic, following which we will have interventions by Bernardino Sassoli and Francesco Lapenta. Just so you know who you're dealing with, my name is Turi Munthe. I'm an Anglo-Frenchman who has the privilege to live in Milan, where I'm very happy. My background is in media. I spent the last 20 years or so investing and building and advising new media companies in a variety of different markets in the EU, but also around the world. Obviously, artificial intelligence plays a huge role in what the future for me looks like, but we've got a fantastic team here to talk through the broader questions. Starting in alphabetical order by their surnames, Bernardino is Professor of Logic and Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence at the University of Milan and a startup entrepreneur with a startup called Deepers.ai. Daniel is the Director of the Institute of European Policy at Bocconi University, and Francesco Lapenta is the Director of the John Cabot University's Institute of Future and Innovation Studies. I'm very grateful to have you here and look forward to learning from you all.
So should I go, Turi?
Please.
Okay, thank you so much, Turi. We are also waiting for Eleonora Faina, who is very important because otherwise we are all men here speaking just for a change about technologies. Let me give you, this is the fourth webinar in what we call the pre-conference week. And it is the title of what we call problem setting and problem solving group is well, the title used to be waiting for some amendments from Daniel and Francesco. Is there a European way to artificial intelligence? Let me give you just for the fourth time in a week some hints about what makes the Vision Siena conference and the Vision Endeavor, which is wider. There's also a conference on climate change, rather unique, I would say. It is not an academic conference. Francesco Lapenta. Francesco is probably the most academic among us. And it is a platform for better understanding the nature of the problems and try to have some new ideas. Something which is very important, especially to Daniel, I remember, is the multi-partisan nature of the platform. This year we will also have the president of the Patriots, and in the past we even have the so-called far left foundation. So we really have the entire spectrum of the European political families. We are trying to create a dialogue among not only academics from different domains. Students are very important, but also managers, entrepreneurs, media. By the way, Turi is a very interesting case of somebody thinking about how technologies are concretely changing media, and policymakers. we will have people from all major EU countries, but also from outside. Here we are mentioning China, India, USA, Ukraine, but we will also have UK, of course. We will also have somebody from Russia. He is a very interesting character. And so it is more like a project more than a conference. Just one last minute in terms of the process that we are trying to share with the chair and the introducer of the various problem-solving groups. We are proposing to you in the initial agenda and concept paper that we are finalizing some question, not to be sort of addressed. This is part A. Then some problem-solving groups prepared by the webinar some paper, some micro paper, which is an initial response to our question, mostly on the problem setting and then on the problem solving. There is a webinar. The webinar will help the group to progress towards some initial ideas that can respond to that question. So we shift gradually towards problem solving. There is a physical problem setting, problem solving group in Siena on next Thursday with about 20 people for each of these groups, and this will transform the work into some final paper, hopefully with some concrete ideas that will hopefully address the 7 macro questions of the agenda. They will be presented Saturday morning and will feed the final paper. So this is a little bit the process. And but I know that Daniel and Francesco did something not exactly along those lines, but I trust it's a great it's a super great work anyway. So I will leave it to you. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you.
Turi.
My understanding at this point is that we hand over to Daniel and Francesco. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you mean that I should start now, or?
If that's okay, great.
Okay.
Fantastic, Daniel. Thanks so much. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm neither an entrepreneur in AI, nor somebody who knows the technical aspects. I look at it more from a macro perspective. And what I see happening is the situation we have today, which is the near total dominance of US firms of the AI sector, and especially, of course, generative AI. It's not something that came overnight, but it's the outcome of decades of much higher investment by a US-based firm in software and AI in general. So not just last year, but it has been going on, this trend, for 20 years. Already 20 years ago, the US firms used to dominate the software sector, and this has not changed, basically. It is just that the sector was very small then, and it's rather big now. Actually, it is so big with its indirect impact on GDP, indirect and direct impact, that it explains a very large part of the outperformance of the US economy relative to that of the EU. And basically the investments in data centers, the investments in R&D by the big US companies, the hyperscalers, adds about 1 percentage point of the growth rate of the US, whereas all of the rest of the economy of the US performs very much like that of the EU. So very little difference, EU-US outside high tech, in particular outside in general, and in particular the main difference is in the software sector, of which of course now AI is the main proponent. What is interesting here is that I've just looked at some data on research performed by European scholars. There's a paper in Nature recently which looked at that. And the paper just confronts the US with the next biggest countries, and China, of course. But if one takes that paper and aggregates all the EU data, then actually one finds that on a number of metrics, the EU is on a scale that is very close to the US, a bit below the US, but certainly nowhere near the almost total dominance that we have on the commercial side. You can do that by the number of AI papers, by the number of scientists, and also by the impact of the papers by citations. That is the only area where you have some important difference. And then you can take Z-scores, Z-scores or so. But basically what it means is that in overall research efforts, the EU is not very far from the United States. If you do the sum, EU plus United Kingdom plus Switzerland, actually in many cases you come near parity between larger, Europe overall and the US. So the big, if you want, mystery or the big difference is that a lot of research is being done on the European side of the Atlantic, but the commercial side is almost exclusively on the US side. And as colleagues from me have told me here, very often actually at the University of Bocconi, very often they find their results very quickly applied by researchers from these very large companies. Let me close with one other observation, which is that if we look at the European software sector, in terms of percentage of its sales, it expends as much on R&D as the Americans, if you just take it as a percent of sales, which is around 15% for this sector. So it's not that our sector is less R&D intensive, but it is just much smaller. And for me, crucially, it is very much concentrated in a different sector, namely the business-to-business sector. In the business-to-business sector, basically SAP, that's 80% of the European software sector. There, each solution has to be much more tailored to the individual enterprise than you would do it for software that is business to consumer. There, the economies of scale are much larger, and there maybe also the larger and more integrated US market at the beginning gave the US companies the scale that the European ones were not able to recover. Now, I'm at an Institute for Policy Making, so I would love to have a a recommendation how that could be changed. But I must admit that what one sees here is something that is very difficult to turn around, because the existing economies of scale provide a moat for the US companies, perhaps not among themselves. They can encroach on their own, among themselves on their business model, but I see it very difficult for European startups to get into the game. And by the way, a very large number of these startups that are financed by the European Innovation Council are in the business-to-business sector, many of them applications of AI. So I think that is, as I said, the state of affairs as I can describe it, without really having something to say how it should be changed. Let me perhaps finish on one thought which very often comes up in the discussions on AI, which is, or generative AI especially, that's a general purpose technology. So what matters for the wider economy, which is in Europe 95% non-high-tech, non-software, is how quickly and how widely AI is being absorbed. I agree with that statement, but I would submit to you that that is desirable, but that's not something that public policy or the EU should spend a lot of money on, because that is stuff that the individual enterprises should have an interest themselves to do. And therefore, this is not where I would put public sector money, but rather perhaps more generally on supporting new ideas wherever they come from. And apparently, as I say, they come more from the business-to-business sector to nurture the next champions. But I wouldn't try to somehow, how should I say that, attack the existing dominance of the US software hyperscalers, as they're called, especially in the business-to-consumer sector. Perhaps let me start here, not very encouraging, but that's the way I see it.
Daniel, thanks so much. I have a slight concern that much of this conversation will be not terribly encouraging, but there are points of optimism that we'll be able to tease out later. Francesco, can I come over to you to give us your view of where we currently stand?
Hi. So Daniel, thank you very much. You provided a very good sound basis for basically where I'm coming from, no? So there's no denying that the tectonic shifts that are happening geopolitically now. There's a fundamental transformation in place, no? And so the development of artificial intelligence is quite surprising, because I've been following. I used the first so-called AI kind of software or platform in 1986. It was called Deus Ex Machina. It was a philosophical bot that you would interact with, discussing philosophical questions, very much like ChatGPT, more limited. But the idea was that you were exploring ideas, no? So the idea of AI has been there for a long time. And Daniel was absolutely correct. This was made in the UK and made in the USA, kind of total kind of conception. So much so that although it wasn't really articulated like that, it was, as Daniel said very correctly, something that goes back at least 20 years. Big tech, if you look at Google specifically, Microsoft and whatnot, understood the value of data, and they started to collect immense amount of data because they understood that eventually they would create immense value. If you just think about Gmail, I mean, Gmail, it's probably the most valuable asset on the planet right now. if you think about the amount of information that you have in your free Gmail that you have been collecting over the years, no? So Daniel is very correct. This has been going on for a very long time. It's simply an evolution of an intuition, and they had it in their system. They're somehow the system already knew that eventually AI would come up. I've seen it popping up regularly. I started to investigate AI in 2009 because I understood it was coming. But they undervalued something. We all did. I did. I applied the linear logic of all other technologies to the path of innovation of artificial intelligence. I thought, like all industrial technologies until the fourth industrial revolution, there would be a direct link between the money invested, the amount of innovation that would be created and patented, and how this would allow to have increasing global dominance. But I didn't foresee the pandemic. And I didn't foresee something that in complex dynamics is designed as or defined as the butterfly effect, a small crisis in one place that shakes the entire system. And what we had recently, it's a lesson in alternative thinking. In the old days, we would think that the headline figures of 350 billions in the US, 100 billion investment in China, against the mere 30 billions investment in Europe, would have a kind of a logic of automatically translating into an advantage. This is an idea of linear investment that's been very successful with all technologies. But this logic is very reductionist. It's linear industrial GDP aligned kind of interpretation of the development of technology. It's the financial understanding of the winners take all strategy. What does it mean? Is that the financial market in the world, in a globalized world, have simply worked in this manner. There's early investors that are investing on emerging technologies, but the big capital is waiting to see which horse is moving ahead. And then as soon the game becomes clear, as soon as they understand that the next stage in evolution is happening, capital moves incredibly quickly to support whatever they think is the winner technology. So this is what happened with AI. I was on the front line waiting. I've been a beta tester of ChatGPT for 5 years or 6 years now. So way before it went to market, it was abysmal when I used it the first time. I dismissed it as, it's going to take 10 years because it was bad. And but then what happened is that a series of events created the butterfly effect. So the butterfly effect, in this case specifically, in my view, was the engineer that went publicly saying that Google AI had consciousness. That activated something pretty staggering because literally, like the butterfly effect, the entire system that was working on artificial intelligence, including OpenAI, they were very passive and they were very slowly developing the technology. But all of a sudden, they thought that the technology was more developed than it was. And to be sure that their competition, OpenAI went immediately to market against the advice of the people that were inside, because initially, because I know, they wanted to test it more. They weren't sure about the results. They went out. They outsmarted Google. The world got notice that AI was coming. The financial system went crazy. But the problem is that we have seen in such a short time, in very, very few years, in 2 years, the immense evolution of artificial intelligence, but we also saw how easy is to offset the linear logic of capital that has supported technological innovation through the first 100 years of the Industrial Revolution, the second century of the Industrial Revolution. There was a direct line between investment and outcome. AI doesn't work like that. The scale, the way it's developed, the way it functions doesn't work like that. DeepSeek was proof of concept, a very different scale investment, absolutely killed a much bigger investment, creating results that got in competition with it. So the whole thing started, and I think it's a net positive for Europe, because basically China and Russia and the US have been playing a very specific game. So Russia has no economy to support general purpose technologies. It never did. They contributed nothing to innovation at the level of a commercial level. So they betted everything they had only on military innovation. China wanted to compete, and they wanted to establish themselves as the new lead, betting everything on artificial intelligence. The US has the great historical advantage. They understood the system better. They have the asset, the infrastructure, the databases, the processing, the kind of intuition of what this new emerging system is. But what they fail to understand is that the logic of all the innovations in technology doesn't work for artificial intelligence, because Europe is starting to disentangle itself from dependency from the US. So let me give you an example. Denmark has recently passed a law that all public offices have to get rid of Windows, and they have to move on open access software. They are disentangling the entire infrastructure from American infrastructure systems. Why? Because it's possible. Now, what you can see in the field when you look at artificial intelligence now is that the dominance of a few actors is incredibly risky for businesses. ChatGPT is evolving at a very incredible pace, but it's also staggering how complex this transformation is. I don't know if you're familiar with all the models, but these models change continuously. Old models are dismissed, new models are created. These models are tailored, transformed, and shaped in different forms, basically every few weeks. This creates immense stability for businesses. If you try to use ChatGPT as a backbone of your business, you're really in trouble, because they absolutely have control over the system, control over the way it performs, control over the models, control over the models that are used and not used, and businesses will never rely on that. So this is already two reasons. First of all, there's an intention to disentangle. Second, AI as it is now, the American model, to respond to the big investments, so to big capital, needs consumer market. So they are totally focused on the consumer market because that's where the biggest capital is. That's where the biggest collection of capital. But in reality, as Daniel said, we don't care, because the real asset for Europe is business to business. It's the data that our companies, which are incredibly powerful, are incredibly organized, rely on, data that are kept within control settings that will never be used on systems that are in America. So what you will have, you will start to see homegrown versions of AI. And basically, we will also offset all the costly endeavors on consumer market AI. You pay 20 euros or 200 euros for a business to have nitty-gritty consumption of data that are consumer grade level to operationalize whatever is not infrastructure within a business. But when it comes to protected dimensions of the business, we will start to rely on deep-seek alternatives, smaller, user-tailored, as Daniel said, much diverse. So in reality, I say, let China burn those 350 billions and the states burn the 1,000 billions that are going to spend on it, because they are still stuck. They may change, but right now they're still stuck in this linear logic, which says the more you invest, the more is the outcome. But in reality, with artificial intelligence, it doesn't work like that. And we proved how wrong they were, because I was having a conversation with Lucilla Scioli maybe 1 year ago, and it was just a few of us, and we were discussing the CHIP Act. And we were talking about building the gigafactories for microchips in Europe, and specifically the one in Germany. And I was telling her it's crazy that they're doing it. It's really throwing money to the wind. We can never catch up on that. We shouldn't. We should do what we did with IRM, a much small microchip that was designed in the UK with the idea of saving energy rather than having the fastest output and the fastest computing. It was to use the less energy and the most small footprint. That became the microchip that now is used in Apple's iPhone, the M1, M2, M3, which were designed for a very different environment, designed on sustainability, designed on low energy. So there were criteria that were different from the large scale and proved to be the right investment. So I think that in reality, the fact that we are weak, it's an opportunity, because if we had the same amount of money to invest, or the same financial schemes, either state controlled or financial systems controlled like in the US, we probably would be burning money in the same fashion like the US and China is doing.
Francesco, thank you so much. Sorry, do you want to wrap up? Yeah.
Yeah, so all I'm saying is, I think that the most problematic problem Europe has is this push to try to compete that is driven by the usual forces that are thinking of AI in an old scale level. The Mario Draghi report, in my view, it's a disaster, because it's trying to intervene in a competition that is simply based on muscle in terms of investment into the technology. I argue that we need to understand AI, that it's way more important than investing in the AI in this moment. Let the others crush their computers and do all the testing and spend billions, because we need to understand how to systematically embed artificial intelligence in a system in a way that solves our problems, and not in a way that is supporting the existing problems, because in reality, this is what AI in the US and China are doing. So I think it's good that we're small, and I think it's good that we are forced to think more creatively about how to use our very little money. If you have a lot of money, you burn money. If you have little money, you think hard and long and hard, and you wait, you try to understand, and you try to see how to leverage it. So I think in reality, we're in the strongest position.
That's a fascinating rejoinder. Thank you so much, Francesco. I'm also thrilled to see that we have Eleonora. Eleonora, welcome. Great to have you on board. For those who don't know her, she is the lead of the Anitec Asinform Association, which looks after the industry association of ICT in Italy. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. So that you, Eleonora, can I ask whether you were able to catch both Daniel and Francesco's talks?
I just catch the last intervention from Francesco. I had a chance to listen to the intervention from Daniel. So I'm sorry, Daniel, for having missed you, but I was in another meeting and I couldn't afford to organize my agenda. Just to be precise, my new title is Deputy General Manager of the Italian, the Industry Association based in Turi. So I just changed my role 2 weeks ago. So unfortunately, you just have the old one, but it's fine. I mean, it's always a Confindustria family, just another hat in the head.
Many thanks indeed. Thanks so much indeed. Perhaps we, at this point, I will hand over to Bernardino to respond to these two contrasting visions that we've received from Daniel and Francesco.
Okay, I
don't
always
see-
forget to unmute. So it's tough for me to comment because I find myself in agreement with everything, even though they're contrasting views. So that probably shows that I'm just very undecided on where to stand. Here's what I have a few things to say, which probably will just add, hopefully, a little bit of context from a slightly different perspective. I am neither a policymaker nor an economist. I'm mostly interested in AI as a model for human cognitive capacities. So that's how I originally got interested in it in the 90s. Somebody was interested in the philosophy of mind and philosophy of cognitive science. So, but there are some things that I think will be interesting. I think there's a narrative that's being pushed, in part for very good academic research reasons, in part for other reasons that are not so pristine, that what mattered most in the development of AI was capital in the sense of money. So this comes basically from research that was done at OpenAI that culminated in a famous paper arguing basically that scale is all that mattered. So basically you got closer and closer to artificial general intelligence by throwing more and more capital, whether to buy more compute power and servers, whether to add parameters to the architectures, or whether, and this would somehow automatically create better and better models, which turned out to be kind of true for a while. And that's why, famously, people like Sam Altman ran around the world saying we need more and more investments. And we've all read how much money came from Microsoft for OpenAI and from Amazon to Anthropic and so on and so forth, right? So this was the standard view. Something happened at around December 2024. So one of the founders of OpenAI, who got ousted in the whole drama, you may know that there was a big drama when Sam Altman was temporarily fired from OpenAI, and then everybody said, no, but we kind of want him back, and so they got him back, and Ilya Sutskever, who was like the real brain behind the whole thing, got ousted and left, and he gave a talk, Ilya Sutskever gave a talk at a big conference called NeurIPS, and he basically said, well, I think scaling plateaued. So he said, this model of throwing more and more computing power, making the models bigger from a parameter point of view, this is not going to work anymore. We need something new. And interestingly, approximately at the same time, OpenAI released a different kind of model, the O1 model, which is the reasoning models, which seemed very promising. And so more and more scaling to come up with new reasoning models. So we still bought into that narrative of throwing more and more capital because we need to develop the reasoning models now. But then, again, this really goes back to what Francesco was saying about nonlinearity, I think. Nonlinearity has been a characterizing feature of the history of AI forever, since AI was first developed. We originally thought that the good direction was symbolic AI. It turned out it's a connectionist neural network system, which we're in disfavor for 30 years. And it's really unpredictable for a bunch of reasons. But exactly when people started saying, okay, reasoning models are the new architecture, so we have to scale them, DeepSeek happened. And DeepSeek showed that if you worked at the hardware level and you did a bunch of optimization at the hardware, well, no, not precisely at the hardware, something like that, you could bypass in a certain way scaling laws, and you could get excellent results with a fraction of the investment. So that's also interesting. DeepSeek also did another thing. They showed that they could do it and put it open source. They released the weights. So that's an interesting thing. Where are we now? Well, a couple of days ago, actually. So the state we're at, it's if the new architectures are these reasoning models, then we should scale them by throwing more money at them. But a couple of days ago, Apple released a paper that shows that even reasoning models collapse past a certain point. So everybody is saying, and it's unclear what the Apple paper really shows, but the consensus seems to be, well, probably even reasoning models don't scale that well. So even there, it seems that throwing more and more server time, compute time, training and so on might not be the solution. So where does this leave us? Well, it leaves, I think we should be extremely careful into buying into this narrative that we can't come up with interesting new models because we don't have the kind of capital that is required. Initially, what we didn't have was training data. And as both Daniel and Francesco remarked, that was the real asset, even more than actual equity, actual capital we could throw at these models. Companies like Google, companies like Facebook had the data, you know. So that's one thing. Currently, we don't really know what the next big thing is going to be, what the next architecture is going to be. People like Demis Hassabis, who is the head of DeepMind, they're betting on some other architecture. So is people at Meta. Jan LeCun has been arguing that LLMs are not the right way to achieve AGI or go in the direction of real progress. So there are spaces for something like hope in, if we have the right kind of expectations, and these right kind of expectations, I think Francesco is perfectly correct, will come from an attitude that says we have to be there at the front line, because in a non-linear way, development in AI might surprise us. So I don't know if this is helpful, but this seems to be a little bit of what I think our role should be as a third possible way.
Bernardino, thank you. That's super interesting. Eleonora, let me hand over to you as a last contribution before we open up for a few minutes of questions.
I'm really and are sorry to haven't listened to Daniel's intervention before, so I just came up with some ideas we have discussed with Francesco Grillo so many times in the past, and some colleagues come. In my previous experience, I was the manager of the ICT Trade Association, as you mentioned, was Anita Casting Firm. I had a chance to work a lot of on the development of opportunities for Europe for AI on AI field. So what we are now, where we are now, what's next? My personal idea and what we're experiencing talking about, and together with all the ICT companies, they are based in Italy. There are two different consideration we have to do. So the point is that when you go to what the average of application, AI application in the industrial AI application, they're normally shared in the market. So many small and medium enterprises are not using AI now. So there are a lot of SMEs that are really out of digitization, even at the basic field. It means that the offer is not tailored for their capacity, their knowledge, and their understanding what AI is and what it can do with AI. The last statistics that come from Eurostat, and if you go to Italy, for example, they are quite similar. We are even worse than Europe average. It shows that less than 10% of SMEs in Europe use AI with, generally speaking, all kind of AI, not LLM or not ChatGPT. We're talking about AI, machine learning, and so on. So we are a lot of room and a lot of space of things we can do when we talk about AI. So what Francesco was said before, I think, is more related, not about to create a new Google or create a new LLM provider, but it's more considering what we can do to use the best AI that our market can use, and which are the opportunities, which are the responsibilities, and even which is the knowledge and the comprehension of what AI is not really just a question of rights and copyright or protection, data protection or whatever. It's more efficient, is more related to how we can improve our economic system using technologies, using AI technologies especially. If you go to the size of the offer of technology, so which is our industrial base related to the ICT sector, the fact is that the numbers are not on our side. Number says that Europe is lagging behind because we are 27 countries. the research and innovation is totally fragmented in the European level. A lot of patents are concentrated in UK, is now out of EU. The two other main players are in research and innovation in ICT sector too, is more China and US, and these facts are coming quite clear, not because Draghi report said it clearly and loudly, but because it's a matter of fact. You can see by the each index, you can see every day when you see what with how many unicorns are born in Europe now. They're competitive together with others around Europe, around the world. How many are there in Italy? If I ask you to see how many Italian unicorns are in AI field, you just look me and trying to, you can see that there's no one. So the point is not to, we should be realistic. It's a question of time, it's a question of money, but it's more a question of infrastructure, not just physical infrastructure, but education and research innovation, university, capabilities to link public sector and private sector. Of course, there are a lot of reasons why it happened. Fragmentation, European Union is one of them. Burden, administrative, bureaucratic burden is another one. It's nothing that every one of us already said several years ago. So it's not coming from new. I mean, I'm dealing with European market in European Union since I was 22, because I graduated in European law, and everyone will say, oh, we have to foster our European Union a single market, we have to work together, we have to share a debt, we have to do whatever we have to do. We've never done, and the results are now here. What is the difference? The difference at the time is not that much, and innovation is spreading a lot of faster than before. So my personal idea is that, of course, probably we will have some specific kind of a unique experience like a Genius, or some of them that have the chance to use some funds that come from Arabia or for whatever to invest in their LLM. But if you're talking about LLM, Meta is now announced at another 15 billion of euros just 2 days ago on AI. Just to let you know, we have focused I think 250 maybe billions at European level. Just half of them are coming from public sector. Is more 200 are coming from public sector, meaning European Union is expecting to invest on digital, but it's more leverage. So it's funds of funds. It's not really fresh money injected in the market. And the other 50 are coming from private sector in the forms of private funds that are invested in other companies. So the numbers are really so far. So my idea is that we will not have a chance to have any LLM in European in the next 2, 3, or 4 decades. That's my personal opinion. What we can do, or where we stand, is to starting to create some capabilities to work together European level, to invest in research and innovation, and to allow our manufacturer and our services to European services to be more consistent in a capacity to invest together on AI application tailored for our economy. It means that we have to let our companies to grow dimensionally and financially, and it means that technology is an ally on this side, and AI is an ally. So we have so many small medium enterprises under 10 workers for each. So it means they are very micro companies, and with that size of companies, we are not able to do anything in the next years. And I think that we have to stop to deal with any act, or AI act, or data act, or whatever, and the next review of GDPR that's coming in the next year. Because what I have said so many times, even the vision meeting last year, I think I had a good discussion about that. We just argued that much. it's not a question of a field of rights or without rights. It was not. We are not saying that is like a green field for no law or no rights or no protections. We have constitutional rights, we have fundamental rights, we have the Treaty on the European Union, we have a lot of regulation that are already protecting people, jobs, workers. There is a huge amount of legislative framework that is already protecting people. Is not really, we are not, I mean, we are not China, we are not Bangladesh. So sorry for just mentioned some countries that are level of rights protection and even lower than ours, but I mean, there are a lot of countries that not really never seen the safety that European is now able to ensure to people when concerning their rights. So it's point that we are now working of building, I mean, a lot of regulation is overlapping others, is a kind of a golden plating. We can call it golden plating if you want, but each country is now thinking about his own regulation on AI just to cover some spaces that the AI Act is not covering perfectly. So we are 27 countries that probably ruling AI before the AI Act is coming to produce some results and some effects. So it means that we are going through a society when it comes to regulation. And what I want to, and this is it's going to be a big problem. And if you go, if you look to what European Union is now doing with the AI factories, there should be this kind of space and infrastructure that will enable companies to test and invest on data and on AI. They were gonna see the light and probably be used in 2 years, 3 years. In 3 years, the world AI is changing, and we don't know if technologies we have now, it will be the same they were tested in 2 years, or what Meta or Gemini or whatever was put in the market. I want just to let's say if you use each of the LLM, or if you try each one of the LLM, ChatGPT is changing quickly, is scraping data quickly, and testing new solutions quickly. So the version of ChatGPT are different in few months, not in few years. So and so about Claude, and so about Gemini, and so about DeepSeek, and so on. So it's a kind of incremental innovation that we are experiencing, and competition is so hard.
Eleonora, do you want to wrap?
And I close up. My idea is that we have two solutions with two hopes for the years. One is to embrace what Draghi report have said about regulation, European Union, market union, reducing burden, and so on, and then invest on people and knowledge and their research innovation to, I mean, reinforce and foster our capital knowledge. It's our really assets now. Without that, we can never, I mean, have a chance to be competitive with a population is getting older and older in the next year. That's my point.
Thanks so much, Eleonora. That's a really useful last talk, because it touches on points made and contests some of the points made by Francesco, Daniel, and I think Bernardino. So useful to have all these different viewpoints expressed here. We have almost no time left for questions, but and I'm not entirely sure how on this system we would see questions, but Francesco, Grillo, how does this work?
We need to wrap up basically, unless we have but we have from Grace and Wally, or from other people who are not exactly on among the spectators, or unless we have some further comments from Daniel, Francesco, Bernardino, and Eleonora, or for you, Turi, if you have some comments or question. Let's say we have 5 minutes.
Great. No. So I wonder whether this has been fascinating for me to see these kind of the two approaches here. Perhaps when we meet again in person, there are some other themes that we might touch on. And one of the big ones for me is energy, this connection between GDP and energy production, which I don't think we touched on here. And I'd be really interested to hear all your views as to how we deal with that. There is, of all the different wealths that the European Union, but the European continent, which I desperately hope to still be able to include the UK in with, there are wealths around data, which you've all spoken about, these kind of closed and very, very large data bundles, which can be used for the kind of work that you're describing. There's obviously huge wealth in terms of the research and the talent and the intelligence which goes in here. But there's potentially also real energy welfare as well. Spain and Italy, for example, with a hard solar push, could be doing interesting things here. So I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about energy when we meet in person. I wonder whether it makes sense to have a little bit of focus on the regulation part, which Eleonora has brought on here. But again, I don't think it makes sense for us to drown in a kind of a regulation fest when we meet, but perhaps to talk pointedly about your very, very different views as to what we should do here. And I think the Francesco, Lapenta, and Eleonora would be a really interesting conversation on this specific theme. And otherwise, no, this has been fascinating. What else should we be talking about, do you think?
No, if I can add two very, very quick comments and suggestions, by the way. Number one, we have a desperate need to move from analysis, especially from the holistic analysis, very big, very wide, on somehow what can we do tomorrow, no? In next months, in some pragmatic way. So this is what we mean by ideas. We really would like to this entire discussion on AI, on the next EU budget, on defense, by the way, that will be very big, to boil down into couple of ideas that are especially meant to sort of unlock the gridlocks. We seem to be paralyzed, basically. With Eleonora, we discussed very many times about regulation and digital technology in Europe. And more than anything, my feeling, I don't know if you agree, Eleonora, is that it looks like that we are always at the start, with very little progress. So yes, this is number one priority, and probably we need to be also a little bit more focused. In terms of focus, in terms of suggestion to find a focus, although our work, consulting out disclosure agreement.
Francesco, you're cutting out.
I must say that I would say that even sorry, probably it's about technologies not working when you're talking about technology. And the suggestion in terms of focus, let's try to focus on two industries. I agree very much, and even the big tech agree very much with the title of a Schumpeter column of The Economist a few weeks ago that was more or less about AI being not only about who invented AI and the large language models, but about who is really able to deploy AI as a strategic lever to transform industries. Now we have industries like insurance, like pharma, like defense, by the way, like journalism in a very big way, as you, Turi, know very much. they will be completely transformed, you know, by this thing that we are calling AI. So probably to have as a focus a case, user case of how this thing can be successfully managed by a big European industry could help. So this is just a suggestion to boil down the discussion towards a couple of ideas. But thank you so much, everybody.